He's a student at U Ottawa, and he also runs his own company, which is I think you can explain it better, Dylan. What does your company really do? Because it's not psychology. We can say it's not psychology.
Borderline. It's borderline. Well, so it's called Mindlock Mental Training. So, at Mindlock, what we do is we work with high performance athletes to develop mental training programs for competition. So, it's to complement the physical side, right? Because training is it's so physical, right? You think about all the things you do, right? Strength and conditioning, cardio, diet, right? There's a lot of physical things that go into training. A lot of times, athletes neglect the mental. Whereas if you ask someone, well, how much of competing is mental, people will say like 90%, 99%. Well, then my question to them is, are you matching that on the training side, right? If performance is 90% mental, training 90% mental, and it's never that. So what it is it's a program to, work on the mental development of athletes that are really looking to be the best version of themselves, and that's all you can really ask for.
Do you think that this type of thinking that you're kind of prescribing could also be kind of used to other people as well, like not just solely within sports, but even professionals? Like, because I know like 90% of being a professional is you got to have the right mindset. Like I can't just sit down and write like a legal memo. I have to kind of be in the right mindset to like want to research the topic and to kind of get myself out of bed, right? Kind of get myself motivated to do something like that.
I think you can use it for anything, right? Because it really is a foundation, right? Because if your mindset isn't there, you're not going to follow it up with the actions that you need. It doesn't matter how good your game plan is. It doesn't matter how good your idea is or your brand is, right? If you don't have you're not in the right attitude and you don't have the motivation or the confidence, you're never really going to go anywhere. So mindset really is the foundation that you can build whatever you want to build on it. But if you're neglecting that, and a lot of people feel like, mindset might not be an actionable thing the way the other things are, right? If I want more sales, I can cold call. It's an actionable thing.
Yeah.
People feel like, well, mindset, either I have it or I don't. People say all the time, well, I'm just a negative person, right? That positivity stuff doesn't work on me. Well,
that's a defeatist attitude right there.
Yeah, there's actionable steps you can take, right? If you don't like where your mindset's at, there's steps you can take the same way with anything else, right? The first time you go for a run, your cardio is not great, right? But you don't give up because you know that it takes practice. But people try to visualize one time and it doesn't work and they get distracted and like, this thing isn't for me.
Right? So it's a type of coaching. It's a type of coaching, it sounds like, right? So you provide kind of like mental coaching to athletes who kind of need the motivation to push themselves harder, to work harder.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that it's athletes that specifically need motivation, because I think that's when you fall into this tricky place of I need help, right? And there's a big stigma there of, well, I'm already tough, I don't need help, right? And I think what I'm trying to do is kind of get away from that place and kind of get away from that stigma of, well, if you're using a program like this, it's because you're disadvantaged, right?
That's pride, by the way. And you shouldn't have pride.
You shouldn't have pride
for anybody.
Well, listen, I think you should have pride in working hard and doing a good job, but you shouldn't let something like pride come in the way of you progressing as an individual to like being a better person. Because a lot of people are like, well, I've done well for myself. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But now because I'm proud, I don't need whatever you're selling me, right? Like I've made it this far. I'm good without it, which is true. You made it this far without it. That's probably true that you can survive without it still. But I think pride is good in some ways, but I think pride really does come into the way with in this sort of thing is with people who have too much pride that are like, no, like I'm too good to be coached. I already know that I already know all these different things myself. And I think ultimately, Dylan, it's like you're saying things that people have probably already heard before, but now you're like very directly applying it to the person. And you're saying like, you're really trying to hone in on someone's duty to themselves to like want to be a better athlete or want to contend better, to want to be a better person, even maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and a lot of time it's about developing the little things, right? I mean, you look at athletes, and not even athletes, business people, anybody, people always set really big goals, right? Here's where I want to be in 10 years. Here's what I want my journey to end. We always neglect the small stuff, and that's one of the things that I help with is setting small goals, setting things that are realistic, something you can do every single day, working on, if you need to visualize, going through exercises on how to breathe properly, right? Like actionable steps. It's not just hoorah, like you're the best type of thing.
Yeah.
There's strategy to it, and it helps, and it's the same way, like you said, you can't have the ego, right? Floyd Mayweather, who's undefeated boxer, he still's a boxing coach. He never
Yeah.
goes to the boxing coach and says, well, you're fired, I'm a good boxer, right? So you can still be
Yeah.
amazing at something and have a coach, and it's just a way to stimulate those things, push yourself in different ways, be challenged. I mean, doesn't matter how good you are, you always need at least someone to put you in the right direction, or to be in your corner. And that's really what I try to do.
Right on. And that's Mindlock. And then you can follow Dylan on Instagram, Mindlock _ on Instagram, and Dylan Nadler _ on Instagram. Those are just 2 accounts. And you can find through his Instagram, hopefully on Mindlock, you can find how to listen to his podcast. But he's told me that his podcast is available on all the major podcast suppliers. And his podcast is also called Mindlock with Dylan Nadler, right?
Locked In with Dylan.
Locked In with Dylan is the podcast name. So Locked In with Dylan is the podcast name.
Steven.
Mindlock _ is his Insta. And Adam and I are really happy to have Dylan on. And we've known Dylan for how long, Adam?
Ecstatic. It's been 8 years? Something like 7 years, something.
And one thing that
maybe 6 years.
One thing that we all have in common, though I can't say that I'm a great Taekwondo fighter. But one thing that we all have in common, Dylan, Adam, and myself, because Adam, you also did Taekwondo, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Well, Dylan and I are both black belts in Taekwondo. Now,
look at you guys.
Now, could I fight? and that means there's some kind of fraternity there between Dylan and I.
That's some unbreakable bond that's been formed between you two.
Yeah. But so then, Adam, you said that we were going to talk about a certain number of things today, and Adam had 5 questions, I think he gave me. And I'm just going to quickly 4, and I'm going to outline these questions before we move any further, because I think they're actually very good questions. And we're going to have conversations about these questions for the next hour or so. The first question is, does psychology allow one to find meaning in their life? The second question is, do you think it's possible?
Maybe should we just go through them one by one? Or should we just get them all out right now?
Well, I wanted to say all 4 of them, and then we're going to go into the first one. I kind of just wanted to make it. Sure. So the first one, does psychology allow one to find meaning in their life? The second one, do you think it's possible to find meaning outside of divine truths? So we're going to be talking about religion on that one. The third question is, do you feel there are questions about human nature or existence that cannot be answered by psychology? Very good to see the limits of psychology and philosophy. And the fourth question is, what do you think makes someone or some people intrinsically better at keeping their composure under pressure? So those are our 4 questions that we have. And I think we're going to start with the first one. And we've already been kind of talking about this, Dylan, because we mentioned your Mindlock kind of project that you're working on, this kind of mental coaching that you're working on. And the question is, does psychology allow one to find meaning in their life? And what would you say to that, Dylan?
I would say the benefits of psychology is it allows you to develop self-awareness. And I think through self-awareness helps you find meaning in life, right? Because if you're not self-aware and you're not constantly asking yourself questions and learning, you don't really know what you want, right? You can kind of go through the motions and you're coasting through life, and you need to ask yourself those tough questions. And self-awareness is really a piece that can do that. And, psychology is a great way for that, because you kind of know what to ask yourself. You're constantly checking in. I mean, just one of the things I tell my athletes is to keep a journal, and after every training session to write in a journal about what they did, right? Because you think about after a training session, you just kind of pack your bags and go home, right? Some people don't even stretch. A lot of people don't even stretch, right? So now it's like,
how important is the stretching?
It's important, man. It's important, but people don't do it because it sucks, right? And they feel like, I just worked hard, let me go home. But it was something that my coach forced me to do from a young age, and I had always done it. So, right now I have like thousands of pages of just journal entries, and it helps because it forces you to think, okay, what did I do today, right? How did it make me feel? Were there any things that really frustrated me? Anything that made me excited? Anything that challenged me? And through writing those down, you learn about yourself and you can apply it next time. So you say, okay, I sparred with Adam, for example. He really gave me a hard time. And because I was frustrated, I was rushing into my stuff and I was overcommitting.
I probably wouldn't give you a hard time.
Well, I wait till you join the black belt club, and maybe you'll,
be
in that category. But that's my answer.
Yeah.
Is through self-awareness. I think you learn a lot about yourself, and through that is how you kind of achieve, to answer that question. That's how you get it.
I have a follow-up question.
Let's go.
So, what do you think meaning means? Like, do you think like how come these self-critical questions can find like some meaning. Like, where is the meaning being found? Is, I guess, my follow-up question.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
I think I have an
think-
answer for that. I think I have an answer to that
Sure, go
before you, Dylan. And that's just, I think the meaning in this sense needs to come from within. And I think Dylan hit this in what he said a second ago. And it's that, like, not only do you have to do these things, but you also have to, like, want to do these things. You have to, it comes from this kind of drive within to be better and to understand what it takes to be better, right? And to hold yourself accountable. I don't think, and this is again to go back to the question. The question is, does psychology allow one to find meaning in their life? I don't think that if you're sitting down and reading books and books of psychology, you will necessarily find meaning in your own life, because it's not only in reading these materials that you find meaning. It's in reading these materials and then figuring out how to extrapolate key thoughts and apply them onto yourself and to wear them and to see, like, what happens when you apply these psychological things on yourself. Are you crazy? Like, are you, like, do you think good things? Do you think bad things? Are you positive or are you pessimistic? Are you defeatist? Right? Because if constantly you think to yourself, well, I could do that, but it would take years of work. This reminds me of an anecdote, and this is my girlfriend's divine wisdom. Her dad wanted to plant a tree. I think it was a fig tree, and the dad
know where this is going.
The dad kept lamenting about, I really want to plant this fig tree, and I want to have the figs from this tree, and I wish, right? And my girlfriend said to her dad, she said, well, the sooner you plant the tree, the sooner you can get the figs, right? So the more you sit there complaining about how long it takes a fig tree to grow, you're wasting the same time that you could use to watch that fig tree grow, right?
I have a funny thing to say about this.
So let's talk.
I heard a funny saying the other day. When's the best time to plant a tree?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But what's the second best time to plant a tree?
Now.
Well, today. Right?
Yeah, right now.
it's just kind of funny. It's like the same thing that you're trying to say, right? Where it's like, yeah, the best time to plant the tree was a long time ago, but I mean, we live in the present, right? You have to make moves within the present. So.
And this is something that I see in society right now, across society. And I know Dylan is especially focused and understanding of these kinds of problems and how they plague athletes. But I think across society in general, we have this issue of people kind of lamenting. And the word of the day a couple days ago was languishing, which means,
which word of the day?
There was this like news article, and it was like the word of 2021 is languishing, because it's
That's not a great word.
Well, it's not a great word, but it's because we're kind of like sitting here and we're thinking to ourselves, like, I can't do anything. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't. Instead of thinking like, okay, like, what can I do? Because I can do something. Like, for example, the three of us can sit down on Friday night and have a conversation. Does it have to happen through the screens? Yes. But are we still going to get some logic and get some knowledge and have a good time? Yeah, I'm sure that we are. Right. And so I think like languishing was this word that was heralded as the word for the year. And I think that is the kind of attitude that defeats us. That's the kind of attitude to say that, like, because I'm not at the top of my game right now, I missed it. I lost. I'm going to lose forever. I can't pull myself out of this ditch. And it's like, I look at people my own age and I'm like, buddy, like, we all hope to God that we're going to live to 70 or 80 years. Yeah. And that means that we're a third of the way there. If we're like, for me, I'm almost 25. Like, we're a third of the way there. So, geez, if you can't figure your life out right now, like, and if right now you're having these issues with like, I didn't make the right decisions, it's like, well, you have 2/3 of your life to right those wrongs. Not all is lost. You can go back to school. There's a lot of things that you can do. So I think right now we have this mindset, and I think the lockdowns kind of complement this mindset of like, I can't do anything. I haven't accomplished what I want to accomplish. Therefore, I'm not going to accomplish it at all, and I give up. And let's hear what Dylan has to say about that.
There's a couple good things you touched on. What was the first, like, before we got into this, what was the original
question? Want me to
read the fig tree, or no? We're talking about the psychology allow one.
I think going back to the fig tree.
Yeah,
I think just to add on to what you guys are saying, I think action and execution is a big variable, and I think it touches on, you were saying you can't just read a bunch of psychology books and find the meaning of life. I Completely agree, right? You just can't do that. You have to execute. You have to take action. Even if you fail, you learn from that. And so many people try to figure out the perfect game plan, right? Like you said with
Yeah,
a fig
that's
tree,
very true.
like you said with the fig tree, what if they're like, well, I have to time the perfect season when I plant
Uh-huh.
the seeds when the soil is the richest. What if it just never comes, right? And this whole time, like you said, while you're contemplating, if you would just taken the action, maybe it would have gone slower, but it would have happened, right? And you
Yeah.
need to take action. You need to execute. And it's like that with anything, right? Ideas, anyone can have. I mean, what's the saying? Ideas are cheap, and execution is everything else, right?
Mhm.
Like how many
Yeah.
people walk around saying, "I had the idea for Uber before
Yeah.
Uber was a thing." It's like, well, shut up, man! You didn't do anything about it. Right?
Exactly.
So you need to execute, and it's like that with everything that we do. You can't wait until things are perfect because it might never come. And the concept of perfection is already so subjective.
Yeah.
Right. So what's perfect to me is going to be different than perfect from you, and we can use that as a shield, right? Oh, it's not perfect, so I'm not going to start. You could have
Perfect
said that
is a
with this
shield.
podcast. You could have said that with this podcast. Oh, well, I have to wait until I have the LED lights behind me and the perfect intro theme and the song in the background and the lighting perfect, and you would have never started.
Exactly.
Right?
It would never
And
start.
but it's subjective because someone could be watching this and saying, "Man,
It's good
I
enough.
watch all these YouTube podcasts. Everyone has the same stuff. I really like that I could see Adam's room right now. It makes me feel like I'm like closer to him." Who knows? It's subjective. That could be to me as a viewer. As a viewer, that could bring me closer. So you can never. That's why I mean it's so subjective because what you think is perfect, someone else could think is trash. So it's always better to just start with what you have, do what you can, and that's always going to beat out waiting for the perfect game plan to manifest.
Well said.
This brings me back to something that Matthew told us, Adam, and I think you know exactly where I'm going to go with this.
Matthew, the third brother, by the way.
Yeah, so Matthew is the youngest of the Bruni Bros. Maybe he'll be a guest on the podcast if he ever stops playing Counter-Strike. He will be if he ever stops playing Counter-Strike.
He will be on the podcast.
We will force him to be on the podcast. But so Matthew had a conversation with Adam and I, and I'll fill you in, Dylan, just so you're on the same page with us. And it's that Matthew was talking about why he's not as outspoken as, let's say, myself, because I don't shut up, basically, right? And Matthew said when he has the option to talk, he stops and he thinks really hard about like what he's saying and whether what he's saying is adding to the conversation, whether what he's saying is correct, whether what he's saying is like whether he wants to stand by what he has to say. And all these thoughts, exactly, all these thoughts are trying to formulate the perfect response to whatever conversation is occurring. And then what Matthew says to us is that ultimately what really happens is he doesn't talk, right? Because in his mind, he's picturing, well, this could be the perfect thing, but then maybe I'm wrong on this, and then there, and then that's wrong, and then this, and then that, right? And you can think, and Dylan, you said this yourself, like the podcast, I could want to make it look beautiful. And honestly, to the viewer, I am so glad that you're watching this and listening to this. And I know that our podcast doesn't look the best. I know that it's not as good as Joe Rogan, but a podcast shall not be weighed by its flashy visuals. It shall be weighed by the merit of its rhetoric.
It's fine because Dylan's as smart as Joe Rogan anyways, or smarter, I would argue.
He was doing it, I don't know, maybe after, but
Dylan did it first.
I didn't want to claim that.
I'm just joking.
Dylan's like a Joe Rogan and like a Jordan Peterson, like kind of like a crossover episode.
Dude. He does it well. I'm not sure if he wants to be compared to Jordan Peterson. I don't know his views on that politically, but
well, listen, not on the political, but what I'm trying to say is Jordan Peterson's very much like this guy. He's saying like Jordan Peterson pushes functional psychology, like psychology that you can rules that you can apply to yourself, action items that you can apply to yourself, and that's kind of where I see. Sure,
I'm kind of interested in that.
Too much about him, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Fair.
See his name come out. Honestly, the people that I consume the most honestly mostly just Gary V.
Gary V.
Yeah.
Who's Gary V?
That's who I consume.
I thought you'd be like a Jocko Willink kind of guy. I don't know.
I don't know who that is either.
Never heard of that guy? Fair enough. There's plenty of people with podcasts nowadays. There really is plenty.
Yeah, truly.
If you're looking to listen to someone talk, there's like endless opportunities to listen to someone else talk. So
for sure.
I applaud the viewer to choosing us to listen to.
I think it might be time to move on to our second question.
Exactly. So, do you think it is possible to find meaning outside of divine truths? So we'll start with you, Dylan, on that. Do you think that meaning has to come from divine truths and like that sense of religion, or can you find meaning for yourself outside of religion?
I'll explain where my head was at when I was making this question.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Explain divine truth first so I can understand it.
Divine truth for me. So you know how people they think that they can find meaning through like religion, right? And you can, and you think that God gives meaning to your whole life, right? Because God kind of breathes downwards and brings meaning into your whole life if you believe in Him and read the Bible or the Quran or like whatever doctrine that we're talking about, right? But without God, it doesn't seem that it's obvious to find meaning in our day-to-day lives because everything can be explained back to just like our primal functions and like what we want to do, but like our selfish functions also, right? So like we can't really find meaning, and even if you help somebody without divine truth, it's kind of hard to see that would bring meaning to your life because it's making you happy to help them because of the way that your brain functions in psychology and stuff like that. So I was just wondering what you thought about that.
I think for meaning, if we're not talking about religion, I think honestly, like that I use because I'm not really a religious person. Think, and it might sound like cheesy or whatever, but being grateful and having like a strong, deep rooted sense of like authentic gratitude is a way where it puts things into perspective. And I think that's the first place to start when you're looking for meaning, is to find perspective, right? So what I mean by that is having the gratitude to be happy about just small things, right? Whether it's you get like the last donut at Tim Hortons that before someone else took it, or you're grateful just to like have the people in your life, or whatever the case may be. And if you could be grateful for things that aren't traditional, so let me give you an example. So because I'm a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo, but for all martial arts I'm like a new guy, right? But I'm doing MMA now. I've been doing it for about a year, right? So I'm training in MMA up here in Ottawa. And I get beat up all the time, like all the time. And obviously there's a frustration piece to it because it's like, I'm so proficient and so good at one thing.
Yeah.
And now it's being thrown into something completely different. And for me, it could be easy to say, well, screw this, right? I prefer to be the big dog. Or let me just, leave it when I'm ahead. I choose to do is I choose to be grateful. I think, you know what? I'm so grateful to be at a gym where the caliber of athletes is so strong. The fact that I'm getting beat up, it's a blessing because it means that I'm going to be prepared when I go into an actual fight.
Yeah.
So I use that as a way to find meaning too. Like, what's the meaning? I'm getting beat up. This isn't fun. Like, what's the meaning of this? Well, I'm grateful to be in a place and have an environment that challenges me, that forces me to be on my game, that I know that the risk is high. And I know that having this caliber of people around me is only going to bring me up, even though it sucks in the short term. So what's the meaning of me doing this? Well, I have the underlying gratitude to be like, you know what? I'm appreciative of this because it doesn't have to happen. And I think, when you look at time, I think that also helps identify meaning. So let me give you one more example.
Yeah.
I used to think before COVID happened, if you were to ask me, if you could live forever, would you live forever? I would have said 100% yes. That was always my answer. 100%.
I would always say 100% no.
I changed my mind. Yeah, I'm no now. I'm 100% no.
I've always been 100%
so let me explain.
No. Let's hear it, Dylan.
Explain why I was a yes and why I switched it to a no. My thought process was if I could live forever, I would just master different things, right? I would spend 50 years being the best martial artist, and I'd spend 100 years learning how to play guitar, and then 100 years mastering like until I just was like the all-time master of things, right? I would be efficient with my time. I would take all these years to just master every single thing. Well, what happened when COVID first struck and we were out of school for a month and we couldn't go anywhere? Was I that productive trying to master things?
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I was sleeping in. I was playing video games. I was going to bed late. I was wasting my time. And I think that was a big thing for me is if you had, and this is something that Neil deGrasse Tyson said that really hit me too, like a while ago. He said, the fact that you don't live forever is the only thing that motivates you to do something right now.
Yes.
Because if you had forever, you always have tomorrow. Why work out now when I can work out tomorrow if I'm going to live forever? Right? Why try to learn something new when I can do it 100 years from now? I have forever. And
this goes to the fig tree.
Limited.
I love that we're kind of relating this back to that fig tree idea because you're right. If now I had an entire eternity to live, and I think I also was like you, Dylan. I think COVID really did put life in perspective in a different way for me. Because I think before COVID, I would have said, hell yeah, I want to live forever. I can like party as much as I want. I can do this, I can do that. And I think now it's like, wow, I had a lot of free time in the past year. And like, what did I do? Well, I mean, like I finished my law degree, right? But like I learned guitar a lot better. But like other than that, like I have nothing else to show for this past year and a half, really. Like I watched more Netflix than usual. I played more games than usual, which I already played a lot of games before, right? So it really is like if I had infinite amount of time, I would be infinitely hedonistic and infinitely like self-gratifying, and that would mean that I would never actually bloom. So because I can live forever, I will never bloom, right? So I think you're right. In death, we now have a chance to bloom because
we have a duration.
And yeah, exactly.
That duration forces your hand. It's like a due date or something like that. It's like this due date's coming. You better get your assignment done, right? It's like you better get your shit in order, right?
But that's about accountability. That's about accountability. That's about actions,
for sure.
Action items. Remember, Dylan said himself, like you have to give yourself action items. And I think having like a stopwatch, having like I'm going to die at some point. That's an ultimate kind of action item. Like I have to do things before I die, and that's a motivator, right? But then even just like putting your own goals on yourself, like I want to have this by this time, that's a healthy thing to have for yourself, because now you're setting yourself up with timelines. And I think without timelines, humans are predisposed to probably be self-gratifying and like to not want to hit deadlines. So you have to like fight that hedonistic, natural, I would call it, it's the body, right? If you talk about Plato and Aristotle, it's like it's the body that wants that. It's not the brain. The brain wants to be better, but the body wants to kind of lust and sin and overeat.
It's like the material side of you versus like the form side of you. That's the Aristotle kind of way of thinking. Plato way of thinking about it. Sorry, go ahead.
I forget who said it, but I heard a quote, and the guy said, "Listen, he's like, if you give yourself 2 weeks to clean your room, it'll be done in 2 weeks. If you give yourself the weekend to clean your room, it'll be done in the weekend." And it really goes to show like the timeline that you set for yourself, you can be a lot more strict with it, right? Because it said if you only had the weekend, you could do it.
You do it.
You said I just need to, you know what I mean? It's like people do that with packing, right? Like if I'm telling you, like there was one time I went on vacation, I packed like 3 hours before because I came back from work. I didn't have a lot of time, but I did it. But if I had told myself like by the end of the month I need to get this packed, it would have taken me the whole month. And it's all about how you conceptualize. Yeah, exactly.
just 30 days later. Yeah.
So I had something to say about this divine truth question. And it comes from a conversation I had with a good friend of mine a couple weeks ago, actually. It was a pretty recent conversation. And she asks me, she was like, "Steven, you've come forward. You said that you're very religious. You said that like you believe in God and you're a Catholic. I mean, I'm more Christian than I would say a Catholic. I'm Catholic by tradition, but I think my brain is more like Christian in the kind of like Protestant sense, maybe more Lutheran." But she's like, "Why? Why do you believe in God?" And Adam and I had this question before too, right? And Adam is of
this for so many hours.
Many hours. Adam and I have been up late at night, being like, "Why?" Adam always asks me like, "Why do you believe in God?" Because Adam's the kind of guy, he likes to logic his way around things. He needs to find an answer that makes sense, right? And I'm kind of, and this is what I said to my friend. I said, "I'm a stupid believer in God. I'm the stupid one. I'm the one that's like, God is beautiful, and the idea of God is beautiful. The idea, like the story of Jesus is beautiful, like the story of like the redemption and the original sin, but also the gratefulness and the respect and the care that we have to have for one another. All of these virtues, all of these teachings are beautiful. And because that, I'm willing to just throw my faith. I'm willing to throw caution to the wind. I believe the entire thing. I believe there was a man that got resurrected. I believed in the Holy Spirit. I believe in God. I believe in the whole 9 yards, right?" And she was like, "Well, like, do you have any logic for that though? Like, you understand that it's illogical to think that like there was someone who was reborn, that like died and then came back to life." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's very illogical. And yes, there is nothing in my life that makes me think that anyone can just revive themselves. But therein is the beauty of the religion, is that you have, like, that is the leap of faith." And I always say to my friends, it's like, if you want to be religious in like my kind of caliber, you have to make the leap of faith. You have to stop thinking about logic, and you have to say, listen, logic does what logic does. but there are places where logic can't fill. And that is where faith is needed, right? And then you have a decision. Either you make the leap of faith and you're willing to say, listen, it doesn't make any sense, but I'm willing to believe it. Either you say that and now you're stupid. That's why I say I'm a stupid believer in God, because I'm making kind of like an illogical step here. I'm saying, I know it's not logical, but I still believe. Why? Because I think it's a good thing to believe in. I think the values are strong. I think it helps my life. It gives me purpose.
Stephen, what does this have to do with the question?
So you said divine truths. Is it possible to find meaning outside of divine truths? So she was having a tough time with finding meaning outside of God. She was like, without God, what does this all matter? And I told her, like, without God, nihilism is a very easy place to turn to.
Yeah, and for those who aren't familiar, nihilism is simply the reduction of all qualities that would give life meaning, because of the fact that it's all simply a physical existence which has no meaning intrinsically.
Yeah,
because there's nothing that would give our finite lives meaning, right? Other than some divine power that would come into our lives, right? And that's what nihilism seems to say. But I think, as Dylan's probably going to say, nihilism is not really the practical answer.
Mm-hmm. But I think Dylan, I'd love to have you come in. Yeah, I'd love to have you come in and talk about like why you don't need religion and why you don't need nihilism, because I think that's probably where your head's at.
I would say, so I had this conversation with Adam a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of funny because it talks to Stephen, what you're saying about just being kind of stupid and there not really being a reason behind it. That makes sense. So for me, I was telling Adam, I believe in the whole multiple universe theory, right?
Okay.
So every single possibility that could happen has happened somewhere on some universe,
like
right?
the butterfly effect.
Everything's thing's the same, but I chose to wear a blue hat instead of a brown. You know what I mean? Like option. And I, the way that I believe it, and I truly do, and I know it's crazy, I believe that out of all the multiple universes, whatever, the infinite universes, out of all of them, this is the one where things work out the way that they're supposed to, or the way that they have to. Okay. Crazy, because what are the odds of that? 0.000.
But Dylan, you have to understand that
all the options.
You have to understand that is divine by nature, though, right?
Wait, sorry. So just to clarify, Adam, it's divine by nature because he believes in a multiverse, and that makes it divine. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Explain.
What I'm saying is this kind of big brain thought where it's like, okay, if you have all these universes and you have faith that we live in, the best possible.
Oh,
well, what would be maximizing potentiality within the universe, right? What would be maximizing the fact that we get to live in the best possible case scenario?
I think we make the best possible scenario.
But that's God, though, right? That, like, God would be some being that would create this best possible situation. Because otherwise, I guess you could see it from like a luck standpoint, where it's like just incredibly, infinitely lucky.
It's very
that's
lucky.
Not God, but I would even argue that infinite luck could be even described as God.
So what you're saying is you don't believe in something. If you don't believe in any sort of higher power, how can you find meaning? That's what you're trying to say.
That's correct. The question for sure. Correct.
Yeah. So to finish my thought too about the whole thing is, I choose to believe that too, and I choose to believe, and not to say that that's in replacement of God, right? Because I'm Jewish and that's like my religion, but like I said, I'm not really religious at all, and I believe in something. I believe in the universe, we'll call it. Okay,
the force.
Yeah. Sure.
No.
So I really think that everything happens for a reason because of that. Because I believe that this has to be the way when things work out. Everything happens for a reason. It's like the dominoes falling, right? Something that feels like it's terrible now. Down the line, you realize like, well, that's why that had to happen because it led to this, and because we've had moments where that's happened. Who's to say it's not going to keep happening? So when people say you're out of your mind, they're like, well, it's a choice, right? And why do I choose this? Because what's the alternative, right? Just to be negative. And I think it answers the question too of Stephen, why do you believe in God, right? When you know that you can't quantify it, why?
Yeah.
The answer is because the alternative sucks, right?
The alternative does suck
to believe in.
Yeah.
And it's a choice because at the end of the day, 99% chance we're not going to know when you die, right?
No.
You're not going to know. So the answer is I choose to, because that's what keeps me motivated, right? I choose to believe this because the alternative is bad. It's like the people that say, well, why just be optimistic all the time? I want to be a realist or a pessimist, whatever the case is, because the alternative sucks, right? I choose to be an optimist because I really think that it's going to lead to better opportunities. It's going to lead me to being in a better mood and being more resilient and more flexible. And because I'm thinking that way, better things will come. Whether I'm right or wrong, I'm good about my choice. And I feel like the alternative is it just sucks. But to answer the question of how can you find meaning when you don't believe in something else? I mean,
Can
I
you?
guess that's the question. I mean, because everybody believes in.
Because you believe in something, Dylan. You might not believe in like the same God that I believe in, but you believe in something. It sounds like, right? And that's where you derive meaning from. So Adam's question still kind of holds true in that. Is that Adam? Is that what you were going to say?
I'm just saying that my question was so good.
usually I'm the cocky one, Adam. Come on, what do you?
My question was amazing.
Okay.
All right. No, I'm just joking.
Well, let's hear the man himself. Let's hear the architect. What do you have to say?
Me?
Yeah.
What do I have to say?
What do you have to say?
I think that I gave you guys kind of an impossible question here.
Of course you did.
I can contort it however I want so that like you guys kind of lose, right? Because at the end of the day, what I've found with my experience in philosophy is that nihilism usually wins. There are some answers
because it's easy.
Answers. No, not necessarily because it's easy.
Okay,
but simply because it's an extremely powerful answer, right? Like it's true. It is true that we are unable to give meaningful meaning to our lives. Like that's just the way it is. Outside of divine truths or like believing in some infinite luck, right? Like it's hard to give our lives this meaning that we so long for them, right? It also has to do with in some part the abandonment of religion in secular culture, right? Because we've kind of abandoned religion a little bit, and religion's the easiest possible answer to this problem, right?
That's something that like I find ironically funny, and it's like it's not really funny because it's a negative thing ultimately, but the irony of it is a little bit like funny, and that's because, you know, in this age where we've seen this rapid secularization of our societies, you know, we've turned away from God, we've turned away from religion, and not because we're evil, just because that's just what happened, right? Like some people, like religious people, might say, like, you know, the whole world's turning away from Jesus because it's the work of the devil, right? I don't know about that. I think the whole world's turning away from Jesus just because that's just something that happens. Like this whole world exists in like this anarchic kind of, like we really don't have, there's not a better answer for it than just that we are turning away from religion. It's not necessarily an evil thing to turn away from religion. But
I think it's just modernization, right?
Well, yeah.
I think it comes from having the answers to all the questions, right? We're living in a world where
or so we think.
Answers are abundant.
Or so we think.
Or so we think. Because now when we have all these answers to all these questions, Dylan, we're faced with the biggest existential crisis of all time.
It is existential.
Which is like, I can know anything through this internet. I can know anything. And I can do anything. And I can buy anything. And I can, like, you can do all these different things. But why? Why does it matter? And that's the nihilist. The nihilist is like, I can do this and I can consume that. But nothing ever matters for them.
This is why I'm most interested by far in like existential philosophy. And for those who don't know, like existential philosophy is essentially philosophy that tries to figure out what our existence means. Like, what is the meaning? Like, these questions are all mostly existential too, because it's just what I'm interested in. I feel like we've kind of lost a lot of our existential meaning. Like just recently, past 100 years or so, we've lost a lot of our existential meaning.
God provides this very easy meaning existentially, and this is why I think like it's why I say I'm a stupid Catholic, is because God allows for your meaning to be very simple. So now because I'm a Christian and I truthfully believe in what I'm saying, I believe that I have a purpose. I believe that I have God's purpose within me. I believe that I have a mission, right? And now, is this a mission that, like, you know, God's from the heaven and said, Stephen, you must do, like, no, I've made my own mission, but I've made this mission thinking to myself that, like, this is something that if I was a good person, I would strive for this mission. And this is a good mission. It's a caring mission. It's a good objective. And because of that, I put God on that mission. I say, you know what? That's God's plan for me, that I'm going to do this with my life. I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to do that, right? And because
like what Dylan was saying before too.
Dylan was saying this, he just wasn't using God.
It's all the perfect, like it's the best possible reality. So it's the one where everyone should. Sorry, yeah, Dylan, go ahead, take it away.
I'm still trying to think about how to answer the question, and I think
it's a hard question. So I'm
people
sorry
that don't want to believe in anything. I mean, you could argue that everyone should believe in like numbers or like just like data, right? Like raw things that, like,
but nobody has to.
Right? You don't have to.
Numbers.
But there's a stat that I think is cool, and it says like the odds of becoming a human is like 100 trillion. One, what is I have it on my phone? 400 trillion to 1. 400 trillion to 1.
That you exist.
Becoming a human being.
Yeah.
Could have been a tree. Could have been a stick. Could have been anything. Right.
Oh, I guess
odds of becoming.
If you think how many living things exist in our reality, that you are who you are.
Guys. I've thought about this in crazy ways recently.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Well. First off, like a tree isn't conscious, right?
Or so we think.
So we think.
Okay, guys, come on.
So, I was thinking this earlier today.
Essentially, what I've been kind of thinking about is, what if like us as humans, we think that we are, like this lucky to be conscious and stuff like that, right? But what if like, it's really hard to put into words. But oh my gosh, I can't.
As you think. Let me say what I took
go
this,
ahead.
And then you can build your thought.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This. We're assuming life without meaning is a life that's less valuable, and we're saying how can somebody that doesn't see a greater view or a purpose, how can we get them there?
Yeah.
Maybe the answer is just letting them be, and here's why I say it. Who's to say? And this goes against what we all think, but it doesn't mean that it's the wrong answer. Who's to say that the person that lives a life with a complete absence of meaning, who's to say that they don't have this just like blissful ignorance where they can just be themselves? So for example, if you prescribe a very like structured meaning to your life, right? Here's where I want to be, here's what I want to do, these are the goals that I set for myself to live a meaningful life. Well, there's going to be challenges along the way. You might not reach it. Right? There's going to be a lot of times where you're down, where you feel like people are judging you, when you're not, on par with your goals. And there can be a lot of trauma from trying to pursue this meaningful life when it doesn't match up, right? You could spend your whole life striving for something and never get it. And you could argue that that's more painful than the person that just lives day to day with no real direction, because they get to just live absent of judgment, absent of fear, absent of failure, because they haven't, assign that as an important thing for them. So we're also assuming that life without meaning is a life that's not as worth living. Be the opposite. It could be worse, where if you set yourself with this structured goal and this meaning to achieve, and the trauma from getting there, I mean, you could argue from a devil's advocate perspective that like that's harder on you. So I mean, there is no way to answer it.
Yeah, there really isn't any good way to answer it. And yeah, meaning could be something that isn't necessary, right? Like you could live without meaning and still live a happy life. You wouldn't be able to call it a meaningful life, because who dictates what meaningful means?
Meaning is subjective. That is one of the issues here. Meaning is subjective, right? Because what I think is meaning.
Yeah, words are difficult to process like that, because there isn't like one universal translation in everyone's mind, right? Like words are just like devices that we use to try and get some point that is a figment of our own imaginations, right? That's another crazy thing too, but that's the truth.
I think there's a good segue here. Adam, did you hit what you wanted to talk about? Remember, you had like that. You wanted to talk about something. Did you remember it or no?
It was something about us being 100%. It was 100% chance that all of us exist in the way that we're supposed to be. But I can't quite flesh out why.
Yeah.
But I mean, so it's probably just not true. It could be just my own imagination kind of.
Well, I part of me believes in what Dylan said, which is that like the fact that you exist, how you exist currently, is, I would say, infinite coincidence, infinite coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is just so many like things that had to happen perfectly a certain way. Think about how your parents met each other. Think about if they didn't meet each other on that night, if their first time seeing each other was a different night. Like even something as small as, oh, my parents met each other a day after than the day that they met in our timeline. Even something like that could change everything in the future. I think this actually goes to what Dylan was saying with the whole like multi-universe kind of idea, is that you have to evaluate that life could have been ad infinitum anything. Like there could have been so many different possibilities, but you are in this one. And I think that is where I differ with Dylan, because Dylan says, I'm in this one and this one's going to be the best. And I think the fact that we exist, I don't necessarily believe that there are multiple universes. I believe that because we exist and because we're having this conversation and because we can talk about God and we can rationalize these things, and because ultimately like we were born a certain way and we were raised a certain way, and now you met Dylan and that's why we can have this conversation together. Ultimately, this is all according to plan. I think it all is. That's how I believe it, right? I don't think there's multiple universes. I think there's one, and I think this is the right one. And it's divine coincidence that we're all here, which is why I believe in God. God fulfills the divine coincidence part for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
otherwise, it's crazy.
I think this is something that we've kind of lost as a society. Is this notion of destiny? I think we've lost it a lot, and it was a huge part of earlier like civilizations and earlier thought, like Renaissance and medieval thought. It's a lot about destiny, right?
Even Protestant thought.
It's like this was your fate, right? It's like it's like a fairy tale. Like your fate was to be this hero and come into the story and do this, right? And everyone and people, people I'm assuming used to think like that, right? But people don't think like that anymore. People think that, oh, science disproves destiny, like destiny doesn't exist, right? And it's an interesting question: does destiny exist? And it kind of leads into our next question.
You decide if destiny exists. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I'll round it out before you ask your next question.
Yeah, fair enough. Go ahead.
A lot of times people say, well, how do you know? Right? Like, why do you think something bad just happened to you? Why do you think that this is gonna end up working out for you better? Right? You took an L, something bad happened, and I'm the type of person to say, well, everything happens for a reason. I say, well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just sucks. How do you know? My response is, single person in one way or another, including you guys, can look back at least there's probably hundreds, but at least one point in your life where something bad happened. Later on, it became something that something that it ended up being something great, and it wouldn't have happened if that bad thing didn't happen, right?
Exactly.
You face adversity, you think it's a loss, you think that you were down and out, but for some reason that set the dominoes apart, and if that didn't happen, you wouldn't be where you are now. Right?
Yeah.
And because you can identify multiple points in your life where that's happened before, where something bad actually was the catalyst to create something good, when something bad happens to me in the present, that's what allows me to believe that this is going to play out in a better way. It's because I use past proof, give me that current confidence.
You're a stoic.
Completely blind.
I think every single possible good thing that happens to somebody is catalyzed by suffering in one way or another.
Life is suffering.
That's human nature. I think that's kind of human nature.
There can only be good from suffering.
Sorry.
What is good without suffering? If you don't suffer, how do you know that something's good? Like you have to suffer through bad to appreciate good. The bad makes you appreciate the good, and the good makes the bad worth it, right? And the Stoic would agree with you, Dylan. The Stoic would totally agree with you.
At least that's what we hope for.
Steven?
What's up?
It's an old book. It's by this guy Khalil Gibran. It's like 100 years old, something like that. And it's 100 pages, and each chapter is a poem, and it's about like 3 pages. Okay. It really, one of the chapters or poems like really goes in on that and what you just said. And the quote from it is, "The deeper your glass, the more wine it can hold."
Okay.
So the more you dig, the more you challenge, the more you like dig, the more joy you can feel at the end, right? Without the struggle, without the adversity, without the challenge, without the downs, you wouldn't be able to feel the ups. If you just lived on this plateau, nothing would ever be that bad. But because it wasn't bad, you wouldn't have a reference point for what good is.
Exactly.
Right. And it goes to exactly what you said of what is life without suffering, it's the deeper you're like the deeper your glass, right? It means that, like, to put that wine glass in, they had to put it in like an oven and burn it back in the day, and they had to like really like go to that pressure. But now it can hold all this wine, because the deeper it is, the higher it is, and it really keeps that in mind of pain and suffering and happiness aren't as far apart as we think. They're just like alternates, right? When we're
They're very
experiencing
connected.
one, the other one's away, and they're always flipping. But without one of them, the other one doesn't really exist. You can't have a plateau.
Adam, any last words before we move to the next question?
No, I'm good. Dylan kind of make me think with that one.
This is going good, man. I like this. So our third question, we got 4 questions. We're at the 50-minute mark, so we're doing pretty good. We might go a little bit over an hour. Third question is, do you feel there are questions about human nature or existence that cannot be answered by psychology or philosophy? And I think, I mean, honestly, this really does, this is kind of a further point of our current conversation. Like it really does kind of just, our current conversation is just going to move forward. Are there questions that cannot be answered by psychology? I think there are plenty of questions that cannot be answered by psychology, but I think more than anything, each human in us has questions that only we can answer. Like, I believe that, Dylan, you have questions that I will never be able to satisfy. I'm sure you have questions that I can answer and I can help you, but I'm sure there are tons of questions that you have, Dylan, that I will never be able to answer. And that's not because I don't know philosophy. I know philosophy. It's not because I don't know psychology. I know psychology too, but it's because I don't know you, right? I don't really know all those things very much.
Let me tell you why psychology at least will never be able to, because the basis of psychology is completely empirical.
Okay.
You know, it's like a psychological study or you know, a theory, until it's tested and proven, will never make it into any sort of psychological paper. It will never be approved. It will never be, you know, widely understood or accepted by anybody. But so many things that you can't test empirically, right? You can't run a study on certain things that are specific to you, or certain things that you wouldn't be able to test out in the open. And the basis of psychology, at least, it has to be empirical. It has to be testable. If a theory is not testable, it's not valid.
Yeah.
And that's just it really narrows the questions that you can answer, because in reality, only the surface level stuff is really empirical and testable. So in terms of psychology, at least, you'll just by using those principles alone, you're never going to have the answer to every single question.
And just to get right off of that is, you know, we have to think about this world. A majority of human beings on this world believe in a God. It might not be the same God that I believe in, but believe in a God. A majority of people on the entire planet.
Is it a majority?
It is a majority of people on the entire planet believe in a God.
Sure? Okay,
yes.
Fair enough.
I'm 100% sure.
Fair enough.
It's a majority of people on this planet Earth believe in a God. Now, is God empirical? Can you empirically prove God? Can you? No, there's no way. There's literally no way. So then,
no shot.
You're right in saying that psychology has its limits, and I think this is one of those limits. Is that it really is based in this empirical study of it, the science of it, right? But there exists so many phenomenon outside of what can be empirically shown that have great, tremendous weight on the decisions that we make. And you can't prove it through empirical means, but these forces still have immense weight. Like, empirically, can you tell me what's wrong or right? Can you tell me objectively what's wrong or right? Tell me that it's objectively wrong to kill someone. Why? Why is it objectively wrong to kill someone? Why is it objectively wrong to steal?
It's hard to even tell you why it's subjectively wrong to do those things.
You can't.
Let alone objectively.
Right? And this is like something that I learned when I started in law school, is like, you know, why does a cop have power? A cop has power because he has a badge, right? Why does the badge have power? Well, the badge has power because it's given to him by the government, right? And then why does the government have power? Well, the government has power because I give them my taxes and I kind of let them adjudicate things for me, right? But then through this, it's like, if I pay for the government and the government gives the badge and the badge makes the cop powerful, well then aren't I the one giving the cop the badge ultimately? Like, aren't I the one in charge? Couldn't I tell the cop what to do? Like,
that's the crazy part about government,
right? Like,
it's crazy. It's so wild, honestly.
Once you see it like that, like once you understand like how nonsensical things are, that somewhat like, and this is what I go into Baudrillard every single podcast, and I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, baby.
I'm so sorry.
Dylan, are you ready for this?
Who is it?
John Baudrillard.
I haven't heard of him.
Jean
Baudrillard.
Baudrillard.
He's this Parisian. Do you know the Matrix? You know the Matrix. He's French.
He surely knows the Matrix.
So the Matrix is like the idea of the Matrix with the red pill and the blue pill is really like it drew inspiration from John Baudrillard and his book on the simulacrum. And I'm not going to talk about the simulacrum this time. But what I am going to say,
We talked about that a lot.
yeah, what I am going to say is that there is like what we hold as objective, and I'm using finger quotes, objective, really isn't objective a lot of the times. A lot of the times what we think is objective is really just subjective, but like we really think that it's objective, but it's not. It's still subjective. Like, you know, in different countries, you can you'd be able to do different laws. Like, does that mean that the law of that country is wrong or right? Like, no, there is no wrong or right because it doesn't exist.
It's interesting that there's agreed upon laws though, like that you can't kill people and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's historic. It's biblical.
Have you heard of the story about the Dutch tulips?
No.
Enlighten.
Okay, so
I want to.
It's true. It's a true story. So back in the day, like during the Ottoman Empire, right? So back, I don't even know like what time period that was. It was a long time ago. Back when like Netherlands wasn't even a country, right?
Yeah.
These tulips, right? And they were like these beautiful tulips, red and orange and whatever. And it got to a point where there wasn't a lot of them, and they were like flown in from all these different places. I don't really know the backstory. Anyway,
but people wanted these tulips. They wanted to buy them.
People wanted them, and it got to a point where they were valued more than gold. Okay, so to get your hands on this tulip, it was valued more than gold. So people were doing everything they could. They were selling their houses, selling their cars. Like they needed these tulips because they were so beautiful. They hadn't seen anything like it before, and it was like the craziest thing, more valuable than gold. Well, time everybody started to have them. Supply and demand kind of changed a little bit. And I don't know how long it was later, but they were worth nothing, right? Now, the question is, what changed about the tulip?
Yeah.
Objectively, absolutely nothing. The tulip always stayed the same. It had the same color. It was the same size. It had the same smell. So what changed to make it from something more valuable than gold to something completely not valuable at all? It was people's perspective of it, people's perception of the tulip. And I think
which is subjective.
When it comes to symbols, everything's subjective. So when you say the badge, right, you know, who gives the power to this, and you could do this whole hierarchy, but at the end of the day, it's just an agreed upon symbol that this badge means power.
That's the simulacrum.
That's the simulacrum, brother.
There we go.
Dylan already knows.
He already knows it. You don't even need. That's the thing. It's not that deep of a. He knows. You know it.
Oh no!
What's wrong?
Steven doesn't get to explain it again. He'll still try.
I think I never. I think when we talked about this, it was a long time ago. I could probably use a refresher.
No. It's listen. We don't have to go into it deeply, but what you're saying is completely correct. Is that we end up prescribing meaning to things, and because we think so grandly of ourselves, we are inclined to think of a lot of these things as absolute, like the power of a cop, absolute, something being illegal, absolute, right? But like realistically, if I was a politician and I ran my own party and everyone agreed, you know what, we're going to decriminalize all drug use entirely. Like we don't care if it's personal drug use, we're going to remove it out of the criminal code, right? Is it objectively wrong to do drugs? Well, I don't have an answer for that, right? But now in our new society that I've made, you can do it as much as you want, and no one's going to get in trouble for it, right? So these kinds of things, I mean, arguably, it would never happen, but I could make a party that was okay with murder. Like, remember the movie The Purge? You could do something like that. Is that within the realm of possibility? Yes, because it's not objectively wrong to kill someone. It's not objectively wrong to do a bad thing, and we have to understand it's very easy to make these things objectives and to make them like absolutes, but we have to see them as things that we're willing to compromise on for the sake of fostering a healthy society with one another, right? And that's the idea of the social construct, or social contract, rather.
I mean, objective just really means agreed upon. And if everyone decided to change what they agree on, then it would no longer be objective. And I think that's really what it is. Like, how many things throughout even our lifetime, or like the like since as far as we is even traceable, how many things we thought were objective that were different, right? People
Yeah.
thought that like the earth was flat, right? And if you went back 100 years and if you took a time machine right now and
Yeah.
you went back to the time where everybody thought the earth was flat, right? And you said, hey, guess what? We figured it out. The earth is round. Guess what they do? They'd burn you for
They
being a
kill
witch.
you. You did.
Yeah. They'd be like,
Well,
you're,
it's a
you're,
Galileo,
you're a
yeah.
witch. Like,
They did
yeah.
that to,
So
to,
it shows
to
that
Copernicus, right?
Copernicus.
even the things that we think are the truth, who's to say in 1,000 years from now, everything that we believe in could be completely wrong?
That's called
Yeah.
the Overton window, Dylan.
That's a Hegelian idea. Nope, that's a Hegelian idea.
Wow.
Nope.
It's
Nope.
originally, I think an
Nope.
easier way to
Hegelian
explain it
idea.
is the Overton. Okay, well, why don't you talk, Adam, Mr. Quiet Pants?
What do you mean quiet pants? It's a Hegelian idea that society progresses and things fall out of the agreed upon norms, right? Almost like the Overton window. I see why you're saying that. It makes a lot of sense. And but Hegel argues that we're eventually coming closer and closer to objective truth, right? That's what he thinks.
Thinks so?
He thinks that throughout time we just toss away the things that we have figured out that don't make sense anymore. We just toss them out.
Yeah.
And we have other things that don't make sense, but we don't know that they don't make sense yet. So we live with them not making sense, and eventually we figure out, and then we toss them away. And then eventually, in infinite years, infinite time, we'd come across perfect truth, right? That's what he argues. That's how he argues for the progression of society. That's why
that I can believe in. My issue is that, much like communism, it's very utopic. It's very like assuming that we will constantly be throwing away the things that are garbage and keeping the things that are truth. But what about, and this comes through reading Aldous Huxley in A Brave New World, what if we no longer understand what is truth and what is garbage? And what if then we throw away truth and we keep garbage? But we do so thinking that we're throwing away garbage and keeping truth.
It would be almost like it would be almost like when they thought the earth was flat, right?
Yeah.
They're going to attempt to kill everyone who thinks that the earth is round, right? Because they think that that's the garbage and what they have is the truth, right? But eventually the truth always comes around. That's like, I think, what Hegel would argue. The truth always comes back, right? It might take, hundreds of years of suffering of people and, society not working correctly for someone to finally, or a group of people to finally realize that what they were doing wasn't working, or it isn't the case.
Okay.
I think you could argue that, aside from trying to discover the truth, I mean, the truth exists in its form because that's how it's always been. Everything else is just a distorted perspective of the truth, right? The earth has always been the earth, no matter what people thought of it. The earth has always been the earth. Same way that the tulip was always the tulip. That's truth. Truth is how it exists in its current form. That's truth. There's always going to be distortion. My perspective of it, your perspective of it. And maybe the question isn't about how can we finally attain this knowledge of the truth. It's just about understanding that everything that exists is the truth, and we just have distorted perspectives of it, and we may never have a clear understanding of it. And it's about and maybe coping with that and understanding, well, where does my distortion come from? Why am I seeing it through I mean, your perspective is just the lens in which you view the world, right? And you have to understand, why does my lens look like this versus somebody else's, right? We could be looking at the exact same truth, but you could see it completely different than me. And the question is, well, why? Right. And that's really, maybe that's something that you should put more energy into, instead of finally discovering the truth, understanding why do your distortions lead you to your assumptions. Maybe that's
this leads to the final question perfectly, right? So what makes some people intrinsically better at, well, the question states better at keeping composed under pressure, but in this case it's like, what makes one person's perspective so different than the other, right? That's a very interesting question.
Okay. Go ahead, Dylan.
It is experience, right? What makes my perspective different than yours is my experience. So let me give you an example. Let's say, I'm at home and my girlfriend is out with her friends, or so she says, right? And she's supposed to come home at 9. And now I'm looking at my phone and it's 9:45, and I text her, no answer, right? I try to be patient. I wait until 10, call her, no answer, and I'm like, oh my god. Now, what do I do? let's say I decide, oh man, like I'm freaking out, right? Like she never does this. I can't track her phone. Her phone's off. Like she must be cheating on me, right? She must be with some other guy, and she stayed over. And I mean, this happens to couples all the time. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And now the moment she comes home, she walks in the door. It's 10:30. She goes, "Oh my god! Like I ran out of gas, and I'm just so sorry. My phone died. I'm home now." And the moment that the truth is revealed, I'm like, "Oh my god!" Right? I created this whole world of assumption in my own head.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
True.
And that's not, you can't dispute that. I created an entire world that was completely me assuming, and it was
Yes.
just so far from the truth. The question is, this is addressed to the question is, why was that my assumption? There's 6 billion people, 7 billion people in the world, which means that there's 7 billion ways that you could assume something, right? So out of the 7 billion perspectives that I could have taken, why did I choose to go there?
Yeah.
Well, is it because I've been cheated on in the past, right? Because if I've been cheated on in the past, my mind's going to go right there, right? So where does your perspective come from, right? Where do these intrinsic values come from? A lot of the time it comes from experience, because maybe if I'd never been cheated on, my mind wouldn't have gone there. And maybe if I've ran out of gas before, that's where my mind would go. Because I know, okay, I've ran out of gas before. It's a good chance that that's what happened to her. So sometimes perspective, or not sometimes, our perspective is really just accumulation of our own experience, right? And that's what distorts it. So that's why I can see something through my own lens, you can see it through yours. We're both looking at the truth, but we're perceiving it completely differently based off of, and that's what I call like the whole distortion piece, is it's distorted by your entire experience, and that's what changes how you filter things. You know what I mean? And that's my take on it, is that your experience guides your perspective guides the lens in which you see the world, and that's why everybody sees things differently.
That's very well said.
Let's hear it,
Steven,
Adam.
what did you want to say before?
So my big thing that I wanted to say was that I think, and we've talked about this a couple times, we talked about like what is truth, right? And Dylan, like with the tulip, it's true that the truth is the tulip is just a tulip. But then Dylan also says, you know, your history leads you to process things differently based on what your history entails. If you'd been cheated before, if you've been cheated on before, then you're more likely to think someone might be cheating on you, right? And I think what this leads to is that each of us has our own truth, our own idea of what we think the truth is. And I would call that my gut. Usually I call that my gut, like my gut instinct as to what I think is really happening. And I follow my gut a lot. Like, and Adam could tell you, like, I'm very keen on following my gut and being instinctual like that. But
Impulsive.
Yeah, impulsive too. Plenty of bad things about it.
I didn't say it. Dylan said it. I didn't say it.
But then keeping composed, I think to keep composed within your own truth, you have to do what Dylan said. You have to understand what your projections are. Like, Dylan was worried about being cheated on. He's projecting that from something else that happened, right? Well, I mean, Dylan, this is a hypothetical, obviously, right? In this example is what I meant, of course. But you're projecting the fear that you had before. You're just projecting it. You're projecting that. And what would keep you better composed would be to understand what your truth is. Are you someone that was cheated on and was hurt? And is this part of your being? And if yes, then how can you keep that in check? How can you keep that fear from becoming irrational? Because there are plenty of things that we can be irrationally afraid of. One of them can be being cheated on. I mean, that's a terrible thing to happen to somebody. It hurts, right? But that is an irrational thing that we can fear of, right? And that ends up, when we're under pressure now, if we have the knowledge that we could be projecting something, we will look at it and try to make it more objective and try to look at other scenarios. So when I say like understanding your own truth, what I mean is like really trying to unearth the many really significant memories that you have, that you personally have, that you think make you the person that you are, and include the ones that make you feel great and make you feel like a great person and that you're doing good, but also include the ones that make you feel like the shittiest you ever felt and you were crying so hard that you couldn't breathe, because both of those things end up shaping who you are and who you become.
I want to hear what Dylan has to say about the keeping composed under pressure. Like, what makes some people specifically better at that? Like, what makes some people like easier to train for that or harder to train for that? Like, for those reasons, like, is it the experience that you were talking about before, or is it something else?
So I'll start this by talking about we're kind of talking about right now, which is the whole assumption piece, right? Is how can you break free of that, right? It's step one, like Stephen was saying. It's step one to be self-aware and to understand what am I onto other people, right? Like what are those things that I'm projecting? That's step one is the self-awareness. But once you have that self-awareness, because we've talked about at the very beginning of this, the concept of action, right? Just because I have that knowledge, I still have to execute on that knowledge. So how can you execute on that knowledge that you have these projections? Well, I would say it comes down to patience. Okay. Have patience and you suspend your assumptions.
Mhm.
You're going to wait for the truth to play out. And if that happens enough times where your assumptions are wrong, you'll start to be able to like suppress that a little bit, right? So, for example, let's say, because part of my job is cold messaging people all the time, right? I'll DM like an athlete, I'll wait to hear back, happens all the time. There's been times where, especially earlier on, they would like read it and not get back to me, and I'd be freaking out. Like, did I say something wrong? I know they read it. I did, I was coming across really friendly. What did I do? Was there something wrong with my page?
Yeah,
Is there something wrong
yeah,
with me? Did I say it wrong? And 24 hours later, it's hey, sorry, man, I've just been so busy, right? I was training and I lost track of time. Like, what's going on? Like, this sounds cool. Let's talk about it. And the moment that happens, I'm like, oh my God, like I was stressing out for no reason, right? So now when that happens and I send a message and it gets read or it doesn't get responded to right away, I just wait. Maybe I'll send another one because now that I know one of the variables is that people are just busy. Well, now I have the patience to be like, okay, before I freak out, let me just see what happens. Let me send another one. Let me send a follow up. Most of the time, they respond and go, thanks for being so persistent because I needed that reminder, right? But
Yeah.
I had to have the composure to do that. My patience came from me suspending my assumptions because if I was freaking out, I wouldn't be in a place to even operate, right? So that kind of answers that question first of it's one thing to be self-aware of what you're projecting. How can you make that actionable? Have the patience to suspend your assumptions, right? And then when the truth comes around, you'll know, okay? And when you're proven wrong enough, then you'll start to be comfortable with that. How can people and what was the actual question is how can people be more
So the
resilient? What was
actual
it?
question is, what do you think makes some people intrinsically better at keeping composed under pressure? That's the question.
Okay. We all have our own perspectives on this, so I'll go from like the coaching athlete perspective, right?
Mhm.
What makes somebody more able to withstand pressure? Well, number one is the experience, like we've said. Have they done it before? Have you been in a situation that was very pressured, that was very stressful, and you came out of it, right? Because sometimes just knowing that you'll survive is enough to keep you composed, right? It's like I've been here before. Right? It's like the first time you ever got hiccups, you thought it was gonna last forever, right? But now that you're 22
Yeah,
years
that's
old and
true.
you know what I mean, because you know
Yeah.
they're gonna go away, you're more composed because of the experience that you've been through it, right? So experience plays a big role of
Yeah.
I've been here before, right? I've been here before. It didn't kill me. I'm gonna be okay. And sometimes that's enough to keep you composed. Number two is managing your expectations, right? A lot of times people just go through the motions, they live their life, they take things one step at a time, but they don't kind of take a second to anticipate, right? And when you anticipate, have expectations, well, when those things happen, you're not that worried. So, for example, right, I could say, I'm going to go into a fight this weekend, and there's going to be a good chance because maybe I'm fighting a wrestler or someone that's really good at jujitsu, and I'm going to be in a place where he almost taps me out. Like, I'm going to be in some really, really tough situations this weekend because I know who I'm up against and I expect it, right? Well, when that happens, hadn't anticipated it, I would have freaked out and maybe I would have tapped prematurely and ended the fight because it
Mhm.
just caught me off guard. But because I
Yeah.
managed my expectations and I said, this is pretty likely that this is going to happen. Well, when it does, my response is, okay, well, this is just part of the plan. I knew this was going to happen, right? Like if I'm going against somebody that likes to talk a lot, right? And they trash talk and whatever, if I haven't prepared myself for that, it may get under my skin, right?
Hmm.
By saying personal things about me and my family. And because you haven't prepared for that and managed your expectations, that's going to rile you up, which is going to lead to underperformance.
Hmm.
Whereas when you manage your expectations and maybe you visualize yourself overcoming these things, you go, okay, I know this guy's going to talk trash. I know for a fact he's going to say as many things as he can to get under my skin. Maybe you visualize yourself listening to these awful things to kind of like desensitize yourself to it. Say, now when it happens, you're like, okay, this is just part of the plan. You know what I mean? Like, this doesn't bother me. Maybe it bothers me a little bit, but because I manage my expectations, really, like, this is just part of the plan, and I'm just going to keep going. And I think that's a big piece too, is when you manage your expectations, it allows you to understand like what the path is ahead. It's like if you just walk up this mountain continuously and you don't have a map, like it might feel like you're going to go on forever, and that your lack of resilience there might just make you want to quit. But if you have the map and you know where the end point is, you can anticipate it, and that's what keeps you going, right? So when you take that mixed with your personal experience of having done it before and having come out on top, I think that's the perfect recipe for staying patient, being resilient, and coming out on top.
I also think that naturally, a fear. It was a very good answer. I think naturally, a fear of failure leads to chronic inaction. And how to kind of get past this, to be someone who operates good under pressure, you need to be someone who's willing to lose. Right?
That's very true.
That's like, because if you're not willing to lose, well, then you're going to freak out under pressure because you're not willing to lose. Like if I'm going into something and I feel pressured, if I'm unwilling to lose, it's going to tear me apart. But now I'm in the same situation. I'm under immense pressure. If I understand that I can lose, you know, and hey, I've been in court. I've been in plenty of trials in Detroit. I've lost plenty of times. I've lost plenty of arguments. Ones that I thought I should have won. Hell, I've even won arguments I thought I should have lost, right? But if I was afraid of losing, I would have never made any of my arguments. I would have let someone else do it, right? Because I would have been too afraid to even perform. So what ends up making you strong under pressure is to say, I'm okay with losing. In fact, the Stoic, and we always go back to Stoicism because it's very fond for Adam and I to go back to Stoicism. The Stoic says, in losing, I become better anyway. Like, so in fact, it's almost better to try and lose. Sorry, no, I would argue it's always better to try and lose than it is to not try. And Wayne Gretzky would agree with me, by the way.
Yeah, I think that it's also sort of like a balancing act in my experience between being okay with losing, but also wanting to win. Because if you go into it only being okay with losing, you're gonna tap out early, like Dylan said before. Like things like that can happen. But you have to manage the expectations. You have to be willing to lose, but you have to also have the will to win despite the fact that you could lose. I think that's very important.
I think it also comes down to even like bring this like not even that deep into make it super surface level. And talk about language, right? How do we speak? How like what are the words that we use? People want to take risks, right? And people always say, "Scared to lose," right? You know, that's already like a really negative thing to say, right? Like it just doesn't make you feel good about yourself, right? Well, what's the opposite of that, right? I'm scared to lose. I really want to win, right? Why can't I, right? Why can't I win? Like what's stopping me from doing that? Like I'm going to go out there, give my best effort. Like Stephen was saying, losing, you're able to learn from it and build that into something better. Whereas if you didn't try, never kind of put yourself out there, then what did you really gain at all? And I think this comes down to like in psychology, they always talked about like fixed mindset versus growth mindset, right? Where a fixed mindset is like how I am, this is how I'll always be, these are my skills. And a growth mindset is I can develop things, right? So that's why people, when they're young, if you're told you're pretty, you're smart, those people are going to actually be the ones that want to protect that, right? Because they were told that they're a certain thing. So when you're told like you're such a smart kid, you're gifted, well, you're going to spend your whole life protecting that. You're not going to take the risk. You're not going to take a hard test. You're not going to take a challenging subject because you're protecting that. Whereas if I get good grades, but my parents tell me you're such a hard worker, well, that tells me hard work is what matters here, right? I don't have to protect that because I can always work hard. I don't have to worry about not working hard, right? Because it's always in my control. Whereas getting a bad mark on a test, sometimes I can't control that. It's just not a good course for me.
So then at that point, it's about perspective, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding that like you always have a certain level of control, right? People say all the time, especially to me, I'm scared to lose, right? I'm scared, like, why take this risk? Like, it's really scary. And it's what we talked about before, like, well, what's the alternative, right? Like, what happens if you go into a fight and you're scared to lose? You're going to cover it up. You're not going to be your best version of yourself. And usually if you're scared to get hit, it's going to hurt even more.
Yeah.
Right. But when you anticipate it, you're like, I'm going to get hit, but I'm going to get through it. then you're probably just going to perform better, right? And you have to sometimes take the risk in order to get the reward. And at the end of the day, if you're not a risk taker, well, then there's a problem there, because it also means that you're not willing to get to the other side.
So
There's
then,
nobody. It's. I'll end it with this too before you come in.
yes,
There is no success story on this planet that has come to an end without some sort of failure. You can't listen to Michael Jordan. You can't listen to Wayne Gretzky. You can't listen to Mark Cuban, like all these business. There's nobody in the world that's achieved success without failure. So what does that tell me when I fail? It tells me I'm on the right track, right?
True.
Because if I was doing what I was doing and I had never tasted failure, there's something wrong here. I must be doing something wrong, because this doesn't match up with any of the other stories I've heard. Any of those amazing stories of champions and winners and successful business people, they always have stories where they were gutted and they were torn down and they almost lost hope. So when I find myself on the brink of quitting, I know I'm on the right track, because everybody's been there. It's just about persevering. And that's what allows me to keep a good head on my shoulders, even through the biggest failures. Is that, listen, not the failure that makes me different from anybody else, but it's how I decide to keep going. What's my response?
That's some anti-nihilism right there.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, I think this episode entirely is very anti-nihilistic. And to add to what you were saying, Dylan,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to finish this thought really quickly, and it's an easy thought. And it's that our question was, what makes people intrinsically better at keeping composed? And I think what we're kind of honing in on here is being willing to take a risk. I think those who are willing to put themselves out there, take a risk, be the first person to do something, to go outside your comfort zone, to those people, keeping composed under pressure will be intrinsically easier. Once you are willing to take the risk, you are going to end up being better composed, because the more risks you take and the more times you put yourself out there, the less you can get hurt by it, and the more ready you are to do it again. The more times I do trial, the better I can probably run a trial. The more times you fight, Dylan, against people that are stronger than you, the better you can fight against people that are stronger than you. Adam, please.
It's the reason why you can't release a house cat back into the wild. It'll just die.
Yeah.
And you just can't do it. And it's the ones that have been exposed to the harsh elements that can survive those types of things. And you have to choose. Do I want to be a house cat where everything's comfortable, but I'm never really challenging myself? I'm never really living this like fulfilling thing. Or do I want to be out there in the wild? And I'm sure there's a spectrum there, and it's not just a dichotomy of one or the other.
Yes.
But it really is a question that people should ask themselves. I can live a life where I take no risks. What if I were to think about 80 years from now where that leads me? What am I going to regret more? Am I going to, and this is such a common thing people say all the time. You don't regret the risks you took. You regret the risks that you didn't take.
Yeah.
You regret the things that you didn't do a lot more than the things that you did.
Absolutely.
And that should be a motivator for a lot of people, where they go, am I going to be okay with this down the line? I mean, for me, like I said too, when I started training in MMA, there's so many reasons for me not to do it, right? Like, I'm starting a little bit later. Yes, I have this athletic background and this martial arts background. I also have a lot of good things going on for me. Do I need to be punched in the face all the time?
Yeah.
Definitely not. Could it hinder myself? If I get knocked out and I get a concussion and I can't talk and I can't look at a screen for a month, that's going to lose all my clients because I can't talk to them. So there's a lot of reasons why this isn't really a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But that's where it comes down to, is the choice to do it, the risks of, well, when I know for myself, if I'm laying on my deathbed and I'm looking at the things that I did and didn't do, I'm going to regret not doing this, because I know that it's part of who I am.
Yeah.
It's part of who I am. And if I didn't see this to the end and really pursue the best version of myself, and I really think that this is part of it, that's what I'm going to regret. Listen, if I try this and I fail and I don't get there, I'm okay with that because I tried it. But if I just decided to quit because it's the safer thing to do, that's something I could take with me to the grave, and that could really bother me. So it's always about asking yourself, what's the long term? It might suck in the short term. This might not be comfortable, but when I'm on my deathbed, am I going to regret doing it? More likely than I regretted not doing it. And that could really be the easiest answer for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great answer. I think I'm good there.
Adam, you've been good this entire time.
I'm good there. I feel like he said it really well. He answered the question. And I feel like at the end of the day, it did kind of come down to nihilism, in a sense where, like, if you choose to keep going and you choose to risk it all, like, you're making the decision that you're not content with a life that's meaningless, right? You're trying to create some meaning through struggle, and
Yeah.
that's the only way possible to make meaning, I think, without an appeal to the divine or something like that. Is like the existential meaning of through struggle is strength, right? That's like
Yes.
always been the tale, right? That's always been the story. So I think it's a good way to end this.
My last question to pose to the audience, to pose to our many viewers, and by the way, thank you for watching. We're at an hour and 25, so we're going to be wrapping this up very shortly.
Yeah.
Also, if you want to follow Dylan, if you like what he had to say, he had some great things to say today. It's Dylan Nadler _ on Instagram and Mindlock _ on Instagram. And then what's the podcast name? Locked In with Dylan? Yeah?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. And so then my question that I would pose to the audience is this, and we've talked countless times now about whether you want to live a meaningful life or don't live a meaningful life. And my grand question, and this is not one that I think we can answer, I don't think we can ever answer this, is how do we balance society between those that are risk averse and they want to be the house cat, and those who want to be the field cat?
Tiger.
Yeah, how can we balance a country where we have people that fit into both categories without doing either a disservice, right? Because obviously the people who want to be field cats, as a government, as a society, we should want to elevate them and help them make their dreams happen, especially when their dreams are, a positive dream for the rest of people. Like, it's not like their dream is to do something negative on other people, right? So how do we juxtapose that? How do we balance that with people that want to sit on their ass all day and watch Netflix? And can they do that? Are they allowed to do that? And who's to say that they can't? And who are we to say that that's not a meaningful way to live, right? And we have this issue. It's a hard balance here, because for society to function, we need people to work hard, right? But then in doing that and enforcing people to work hard, we also take we forget those who don't want to do that, who don't subscribe to that same kind of thinking, and who would prefer to be the house cat. I don't know. Any thoughts? Any leaving thoughts on that?
I think we should leave it. We should leave it to the audience or the next episode. I think because it feels like it would take a long time to go into that.
Yeah.
But there should be some balance, obviously. But it's not clear where the balance would be.
Yeah.
So,
any last thoughts, Dylan?
I think it's a good question. Tell us what you think. We'll talk about it next.
No, I think like Adam was saying,
next time. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to attack it. And like Adam said, you can go onto it forever. So I'll kind of leave it with this, which is, my parents have told me to go to bed earlier when I was younger all the time, right? And because they told me to do it, I didn't want to do it. If there were days where I had to be up early for something and I went to bed late, sometimes through that experience alone, me seeing it through like myself and me experiencing myself, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to start going to bed earlier, right? So sometimes the answer isn't about changing each other's minds. It's just about letting things play out, right? Because I could tell you something 1,000 times, but you just not like to be told, right? Sometimes you have to live your life, right? I could preach optimism 7 days out of the week, and you just might not be with it. But 6 years from now, you might have missed an opportunity because you were pessimistic, and that inhibited you from being your best self. And now you're like, damn, maybe I should be more like that. So that's my leaving thought, is maybe the answer is just to not try to change people. Going back to the whole perspective of truth, is that the way that I see it, just because it's how I see it, doesn't mean it's objectively right. Letting someone else have their objective truth, and understanding that, listen, I can tell you my opinion once or twice or a couple times if I really care about you. At the end of the day, maybe this isn't something that you need to hear from somebody, but something that you have to experience yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of life, when people say life's what you make it, that really is what it's all about.
Amen.
That's very true.
This was a great episode. Thank you, Dylan, for coming on.
Thank you, Stephen, for hosting.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Adam, for hosting.
Thank you, Adam, for making the questions, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
We will see everybody on the next episode, which will come, whenever the heck it comes. And hopefully the next episode we can get like a cigar. I want to have a cigar episode personally.
Yeah.
Like an outdoor cigar episode, but we'll see. Regardless, follow Dylan on his stuff. Follow us, Bruni Bro TV. And I hope you enjoyed. Make some comments if you have questions as to what we talked about. If you have ideas for further podcasts, leave some comments on it. And if you have any questions for Dylan that I can relay them to him through the comments as well, Dylan.